Hello. Peterborough United are in trouble tonight after players and coaching staff were involved in a mass brawl on the pitch.
It all started after a bad-tempered match last night at the London Road ground. Soon after the final whistle, kicks and punches were thrown on the touchline, and that triggered a free-for-all with players and coaching staff joining in. The details now from James Burridge in Peterborough.
Stuart, last night's game was an ugly one between Posh and Notts County. Throughout it, players had to be separated. And at 90 minutes, 20 or 30 players and coaches could be found on the touchline just by the dugout. And yet what happened then, just one small incident sparked off a melee to be seen for the next 3 or 4 minutes. It's tarnished the image of football once more.
And we've got a bit of trouble down here. There's punches being thrown down there. Very, very angry scenes at the end of this game.
Once more, football's hit the headlines for all the wrong reasons. Only this time it wasn't the fans involved, it was the players and coaches of Peterborough and Notts County. As the final whistle blew, over 20 became involved in a mass brawl at the end of an ill-tempered game.
There was a bit of shock because you don't see it every day. You see handbags now and again, but there were punches thrown. Contact was made as well, and for stewards to have to get involved and drag people down the tunnel. So families watching, kids watching as well. It doesn't set a great example, and we know, don't we, that the FA are really trying to stamp down on this kind of thing.
Peterborough's manager Gary Johnson was already inside the dressing room waiting to give his players a dressing down when he heard the noise outside the tunnel.
I have seen the video that we've got, and just to see, and you know, of course I didn't see anything over the top on our video. Whether other people have got other things, I don't know. But there was certainly a lot going on in the technical areas, to be honest with you. There was too many people in and around that area come the end of the game, and obviously, as you say, it all went off.
The game throughout had been a tempestuous affair. Players had already squared up after Grant McCann was shown a red card. Notts County also had a man later sent off. It marred a closely fought game, with County scoring 3 goals in 14 minutes in the first half. And despite a posh comeback, they ended up winning 3-2. The Football Association are awaiting the match report from the referee and will make a decision in the next 24 to 48 hours over whether any charges should be brought. James Burridge, BBC Look East. Well, in the past few hours, the club's issued a statement about what happened last night. Posh say the incident was unacceptable. It developed at the end of last night's game, and as a result, they've launched a full-scale inquiry and will allow the facts to be presented. The football club does not condone, it says, such behaviour and have been happy to supply the FA, the Football League and the police with all the relevant video evidence to support this stance. It is likely that we will hear something from one of those 3 organisations, Stuart, within the next 48 hours.
James, thank you very much.
There's a new development tonight in the unsolved murder of Rachel Manning. Rachel was strangled at a golf club in Milton Keynes 10 years ago. Last night, 2 men were arrested. Throughout the day, they were questioned by detectives in Milton Keynes. A short while ago, they were released. Our reporter Nikki Jenkins is there now. Nikki.
Susie, as you say, police had until 7 o'clock this evening to question these 2 men, but we've been told this evening that they have now been released on police bail until November. No charges forthcoming at this stage. Now, this has been the only real development in the Rachel Manning investigation since her boyfriend was convicted of her killing in 2002. Barry White and she had been at a fancy dress party on the night she disappeared. They'd argued, she'd gone off and he'd gone to look for her, but of course she wasn't found. Or rather her body was found 2 days later at Woburn Golf Club. Now, Barry was convicted of her killing. His friend Keith Hyatt was convicted of perverting the course of justice for allegedly having helped him to hide the body. And it wasn't until the BBC's Rough Justice programme's investigation that there was finally a retrial, and Barry was released after serving 6 years in jail. Keith Hyatt had already completed his sentence. So for the first time, 2 other names, 2 other men being mentioned in this investigation, a 38-year-old and a 35-year-old, both from Bletchley, like Keith and Barry. But it remains to be seen whether this becomes a significant development in the investigation.
Nikki, thank you very much.
Trade union supporters have been taking to the streets today across the region to protest against cuts to public services. The action here was organised by the union Unison and was part of a day of action across Europe organised against the financial squeeze.
We got £21.50. Anybody going to offer 23 quid?
In Cambridge today, a mock auction of council services. The message from Unison: services will be taken out of council hands by the cuts and put into the voluntary or the private sectors.
We're very concerned that what's happening is an excuse to get rid of the public sector. We know that there's a financial crisis brought about by the bank's failures, but the strategy they've adopted is something we're very, very concerned about. It's going to undo 50 years of public sector development, and we think it's going to be impossible to retrieve.
Demand the impossible now. There were demonstrations across the east today involving hundreds of union members, but this is what they're all fighting for. People like Paul Corder from Norwich, a full-time carer for his wife. His children have had their young carers' support halved, and he's feeling vulnerable.
It frightens me that any cuts made to benefits would force me back into work full-time, which means that my children would have to then take on the caring role for their mum, which would, in the long term, weaken their potential to learn and to carry on their education and move on into sixth form and then off to university.
But councils in this region have to save hundreds of millions of pounds. In Essex, £300 million by 2013. In Norfolk, £155 million. Northamptonshire, £100 million by 2014. And Suffolk, a 30% budget cut. They were demonstrating outside Peterborough City Council today, where cuts are imminent.
We're talking at least 25%. It means millions of pounds out of our budget, and I really don't see how else we could deal with it. In fact, what do you do? If they take the money out of our budget, we have to make the cuts in order to balance our books at the end of the year.
The unions have made their voice heard today, and they may have public support. But for cash-strapped councils, the books will have to be balanced, and that means cuts. Ian Barmer, BBC Look East.
Well, this afternoon I spoke to Dave Prentice, the General Secretary of the union Unison, and I started by asking if the day of action would eventually become industrial action.
We're talking about public service workers, mainly women who work in our hospitals and our local community services. For them, taking industrial action is a final resort. They don't want to leave the people in their care. But at the same time, they're worried sick whether or not they've got a job tomorrow when they go into work. They know that they may not get another pay increase for 3 years, and they know that there's a coalition commission looking at whether or not to take away their pensions.
You've studied economics. You will know that something needs to be done because we have a massive debt.
Of course we do. We've got a big deficit, £155 billion, caused by the failure of the banking system and the bankers who are supposed to be running our country. All this coalition is talking about is cutting our public services and our community provisions. And people in this country believe that that we need to do more than that. We need to get the people who've caused these problems to actually contribute to dealing with the deficit as well.
Isn't one of the problems, though, with the debt that we have, is that the previous government kept borrowing money and spending money we didn't have?
Well, that's not quite true, is it? The debt of this country, the overall debt, is about 3% of our wealth. It's been at that level since for 100 years. So the debt of our country has not increased. The World Bank says that we're the 5th best country to do business with. We don't have to reschedule any of our loans for the next 14 years. And yet we're told that public service workers have got to lose their jobs, lose their pensions, lose their pay over the next 4 years.
But Ed Miliband, the new leader of the Labour Party, somebody that the union supported, said broadly it's the right starting point to say that we need to reduce the deficit and we need to reduce the debt over the next 4 years.
Yes. Well, reducing the deficit, we all agree with that. But what we're saying is there are different ways of doing it. The Labour Party is saying that the deficit has to be dealt with, but it should be dealt with over a longer period. And it should be dealt with when we know that we've got growth in our society, where we know that we've got our young people back into work. Over 1.5 million people are going to be made unemployed over the next 4 years. That is not good for our society, it's not good for our economy, and it's the wrong way to deal with this deficit.
Mr. Prentice, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Well, still to come tonight, the goals from the football last night.